Hi everyone, welcome to Showtime Talk. I'm your host Tomoya. On this channel, we discuss all things baseball. Today we have Orange County registered baseball writer Jeff Fletcher with us to discuss Ichiro Suzuki, Shohei Ohtani, and other Japanese major leaguers. So let's get started. Let's talk about Ichiro, who's widely considered the greatest Japanese player to play in the major leagues. You said in a previous episode that Ichiro will likely become a first ballot Hall of Famer, meaning he'll be voted into the Hall of Fame as soon as he becomes eligible in 2025. Why?
Well, I think that he's, the impact he made on baseball right away. You know, when you win Rookie of the Year and MVP the same year, that's a pretty difficult feat to do. And he continued to be a dominant player for years. I think he made 10 All-Star teams. I think he won 10 Gold Gloves. He was one of the greatest pure hitters that there was in the game. And by pure hitter, I mean just a guy who's able to just get the bat on the ball and get hits. Now, I think that the problem is, he didn't hit a lot of home runs. So that is going to kind of put him behind some other guys that, had better overall numbers when you start to look at power and you include power with batting average. But when it comes to just pure batting average and the ability to just get a lot of hits, there was nobody better than Ichiro in this generation. And I think that, as I've looked at his numbers, they are, because of the lack of power, they are not quite as dominant as I had thought in my mind. But I think still, based on what he did defensively and just the raw number of hits he got, I think he still is going to be a Hall of Famer. Maybe not first ballot. I mean, probably, but I wouldn't bet my house on it. But I think he's certainly going to be a very strong candidate, and I would expect him to get in the Hall of Fame.
Do you think it hurt him that the fact that baseball writers now tend to emphasize power and if stats like WRC plus, OPS, and WAR figures, which put Ichiro kind of behind some other power hitters?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly there's going to be that little case against him is if you look at those numbers on a pure OPS standard, he's not as high as some other guys, which is only because he didn't hit a lot of home runs. That's really the only knock against him. But I mean, I think he's got enough other things going for him that he should be able to overcome that. His skill as a quote unquote singles hitter was so off the charts better than everybody else. 220, 230, 240 hits in a season when, hardly anybody else would even get to 200. So, I mean, that is a skill that even if it's not the most coveted skill, just being able to get singles, he was so far above everybody else that I think that also made him stand out.
He came to the U.S. in the middle of the steroids era, and he played baseball in a very different way, focusing on contact and speed. What do you think was his impact on American baseball?
I don't really necessarily think that there was an impact in terms of a lot of other players trying to copy what he did, because I think that still teams, if they were to draw up the kind of player they want, ideally, it would be a guy who hit for more power, basically because that's sort of the most efficient way to create runs. But I think that what Ichiro did was still really impressive. He did something that nobody else could do. I think that it certainly also, you combine the speed and the defense. Those were great things too that certainly you shouldn't discount. So I think that he was a great player, but he was different than everybody else. And but you really haven't seen a lot of other players following him and trying to be like he was.
Do you think he changed the way Americans think about hitters from Japan?
Yes, I do, because prior to that, really it was only pitchers that came from Japan. And I think there was probably a little stigma that the guys who were in Japan as hitters couldn't make the transition to the big leagues. And really nobody had successfully until Ichiro. And then after Ichiro, you saw a few more, Hideki Matsui and obviously now Ohtani have become pretty good hitters too.
We talked a little bit about this, but his career OPS is
757.
Oh, great. You know your stuff. 757.
I looked it up.
Awesome. Which isn't bad, but not particularly high. But he still had really high WAR numbers. I think he's like 120 in terms of like WAR numbers of all time by Baseball Reference, something like that. Is it because what made him valuable as a player is actually his defense, not so much hitting?
Yeah, well, I mean, you add that to it. I mean, that's WAR does take into account defense and base running, and those are two things that Ichiro was great at. So that definitely adds to his total resume. Purely on his offense, it would have been harder for him to even play regularly if he just had this offensive profile, but was not a good defensive player who was not fast. Because you've got to do a few things well, and if all you can do is hit, but you can't run and you can't play defense, you don't hit for power. No matter how good of a singles hitter you are, it's going to be tougher for you to stick around. So I think the fact that he did stick around for so long, even as basically a single hitter, tells you how valuable his defense and base running were.
So let's specifically look at his prime years. I think it's 2001 and 2004. In 2001, he had 242 hits, which led the league, and 56 stolen bases, 8 home runs, 350 batting average, and OPS is 838. Anyone the MVP? Was he worthy of the MVP that year?
Well, I would have to look at everybody else in that season, but I would say normally you're probably not going to win the MVP with 830 OPS. But I think that he was such a dynamic player, and he was so new to the game, and people hadn't really seen a player like him. I think that helped, and I think that people didn't really analyze the players the same way they do today. So I'd really have to look at what the other players were doing that year. But I think today it would be really hard to win the MVP with an OPS like that.
And in 2004, he hit 262 hits, a new record for the major leagues, and 372 batting average. I think this was his best year. How do you look at these hits, the number of hits, 262?
It's a pretty amazing number of hits. And it's even, nowadays, nobody's going to come near those records, because now we have a lot more defensive shifting going on, and that makes it even harder to get hits. So I think the major league batting average probably in those years that Ichiro was doing that was probably like 260. And right now it's like 238. But they're definitely very impressive numbers to get that number of hits.
Another player that we talk about a lot in Japan is Hideki Matsui. How is he viewed as a hitter in the United States?
The thing with Matsui is he had a few good years, but he really didn't play that long in the United States, because I believe he was a little older when he first got here. So we didn't really get his full career, whereas Ichiro, I believe, was 25 years old maybe when he showed up in the major leagues. Matsui was probably 30.
Yeah, he was
So
29 when he came over.
yeah, so we really didn't get to see Matsui's whole prime, and a lot of his career in the major leagues was kind of when he was on the downside and when he was older. So I think that he had some really good years early in his career, but his career was just too short in the major leagues for him to really be, viewed among the all-time greats.
Do you remember him as a power hitter?
Yeah, I remember him as this kind of a good run producer, DH type guy, that you want in the middle of the order and to drive in big runs for you. I don't remember too much about him defensively. If he was very good defensively, I think he was DH a lot, primarily because he was getting older too when he was in the major leagues. So that's kind of my memory of him.
But he's not in the league, in the same league as Ichiro, right? His numbers.
No, and I mean, like I said, I think the biggest difference was just the age. If Matsui would have come to the United States when he was 25 years old, like Ichiro did, we would be
Ichiro
having
was
a whole
27. I
conversation.
looked it up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like I guess Ichiro just played a lot longer too. I mean, Matsui, I believe, only played 10 years in the big
Right.
leagues, and Ichiro was like 20. So that's the biggest difference.
It's pretty impressive that he played actually 20 years in the major leagues, right? Ichiro did.
Yeah, that's another really Hall of Fame worthy accomplishment of his, just to last as long as he did. And the fact that he got 3,000 hits in the major leagues, well, he didn't even start his career in the major leagues after he'd already had 800 or 900 hits in Japan or whatever. That's pretty incredible. I think he had 4,000 total hits between U.S. and Japan, I believe.
Right.
Which is amazing.
Now, let's talk about Ohtani. Let's compare Ohtani and those two other guys. So Ohtani, when you look at his WRC plus this year, I mean, his WRC plus is second in the major leagues at I think like 670. And I looked it up, and Ichiro was like, his best year was I think below 130. And Matsui was like 140 in his best year. So what does it say about Ohtani's talent as a hitter?
Well, obviously, Otani's in a different class than those other guys on a single year basis. Ichiro's best season was not what Ohtani is doing this year, just as a hitter, even if he didn't pitch at all. But it's only 1 year. So that's the difference with, let's see Ohtani do this for 10 or 12 or 14 more years before we start to put him in the Hall of Fame. But on a single year basis, 2021 Otani, the hitter, is far better than any other single season from any other Japanese player in history.
How about his pitching stats? How would you compare him to other top Japanese players who played here? Yu Darvish, Kenta Maeda, Masahiro Tanaka, and Hideo Nomo.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of other great Japanese pitchers. So I don't even know, like, if you just eliminated Otani as a hitter and just look at him as only as a pitcher, he would just sort of be in that group. I don't think you'd put him ahead of necessarily those guys. I mean, a lot of those guys had really good years, Nomo and Yu Darvish, and they're all kind of similar. So I don't think you could put Otani necessarily ahead of them just as a pitcher.
What's amazing is that he's actually hitting, right, on top of pitching, and he's better than any of those Japanese hitters. Plus, he's among the top Japanese pitchers. That's pretty amazing.
That is what is so incredible about him. That is what you have to keep reminding yourself all the time, is that what he's doing is something nobody has done in 100 years. It is very incredible, and we shouldn't take it for granted even for a day.
Anything else you want to add to what we talked about?
No, I mean, I would just say that on Otani, a lot of people already want to start comparing him to like all-time great players and everything. And I think it's just way too early for that because, he's really just 2021 is the year that has really made him great. Because if you look at 2018, 2019, and 2020, he had great potential, but he was hurt a lot and he didn't really put it together. That's still on his career resume, and he has to do a lot more of 2021 before we could just forget about 18, 19, and 20. So he's definitely got a lot of work to do before he starts to, go in the Hall of Fame or, say he's better than Ichiro or any of those kind of things.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any future videos. You can also watch our past videos from the description below. Hope to see you again next time.